Okay, here's a couple questions where you have to use a quadratic formula to solve. I guess you could solve it with some other strategies too, but we can use a quadratic equation. So I have 25z squared plus 98 is equal to 100z. Now, it's supposed to look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 in order to solve. Although you can use some other strategies, but this is typically how we like to have it, especially if we're going to use a quadratic formula. So I need to move this 100z over to the other side. So I'll subtract 100z here, and over on the left side there's no other z. I'll maybe just throw it in the middle, 100z there. So then I have 25z squared minus 100z plus 98 equals 0. Just check to make sure I have all my signs right. Yeah, I think I'm right. Okay, so now if I use the quadratic formula will be, my answers, in this case it'll be z, is equal to minus b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Or minus whatever b is, plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, and b is a negative 100, another negative 100, a is 25, c 98. All over 2 times a is 25 again. Okay, so minus a negative 100 would be a positive 100, plus or minus square root. 100 squared would be, I think, 10,000, minus 4 times 25 is 100 times 98 would be, 9,800. All over 2 times 25 is 50. Okay, as we keep simplifying, 100 plus or minus the square root of 200 over 50. At this point here on a test, I'm probably giving you 4 out of 5. You've done all the heavy lifting. It's just that the expression can be simplified a bit more. And what you want to focus on is that square root. And to see if there's any number, one of those pretty numbers, that you can take the square root of. Like I could say that 200, say, is 20 times 10. But I can't take the square root of either one of those numbers evenly. But if I take 200 and say, well, that's the same as 100 times 2, I know that the square root of 100 comes out evenly, right? 10. And so that's the one that I want to use. So I'm going to rewrite this as 100 plus or minus the square root of 100 times the square root of 2, all over 50. Okay? And now the square root of 100 is 10, so this would be 100 plus or minus 10 root 2 over 50. Okay, if I got to that point, I'm probably 4.5 out of 5. We're almost there. This 50 at the bottom is a common denominator. And so what I can do is I can split the top and just write it as I have 100 over 50 plus or minus 10 root 2 over 50. And then I can simplify each of those fractions. 100 divided by 50 will just be 2, plus or minus. And then 10 goes into itself once and into 55 times. So there'd be 2 plus or minus 1 root 2 over 5, which that 1 you probably don't need to write. You can just write it as 2 plus or minus root 2 over 5. Okay? It was good for you to identify that it was probably from here down that you were wondering about and how to simplify it. Let's try one more. So here I've got a function or an equation, and let's see what you're doing here. So this one here, what you started to do was completing the square, which you can do, and I'll show you both ways. So you come up with this right here, and that's good. Let me finish off that, then let me look at your quadratic formula. So if I have x plus 2 all squared is equal to 10, Oh, now, one thing you have to do is you added 4 onto this left side. You also have to add 4 onto that other side. So I'm going to have 14 on the right. So I'll have 14 here. So you can do it this way, and this is completing the square. That's the method for solving that equation, or that you're doing there. Okay, so you'd square root this side, square root this side. Make sure you add a plus or minus there. So the square and the square root cancel, leaving you with x plus 2 is equal to the plus or minus square root of 14. Now the square root of 14 you can't really do, and so I would just leave it like that. But here I want to solve for x. So subtract 2 here and subtract 2 there. So it'll be x is equal to minus 2 plus or minus the square root of 14. You could have rewritten it that as plus or minus root 14 minus 2 like that, but typically we write it, I don't know why, but typically we write it with the square root at the back. Now let me just check your quadratic equation here too, because we should get the same thing, right? So minus b, so it'd be minus 4, and then 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. Good. So 16 plus 40 is 56. This is good. We just need a plus or minus right there. So at the top there, that is completing the square, that part. Down here, this is another way you can solve the equation, and it's going to work fine too. So I have x is equal to minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 all over 2. Okay, so this thing is separate. Minus 4 plus or minus, that's the square root of 56 all over 2. Okay, so again with 56, like that other question, I look for a number that'll divide into that evenly that I can take the square root of, and I think it's 4. So I can write 4 times 14. I think 4 times 14 is 56, and I use 4 because I can take the square root of that. So this will be minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 14 all over 2. Okay, getting closer. I'm hoping I get the same as we got up there. So minus 4 plus or minus root of 4 is 2, root 14 all over 2. Now I'll use this as a common denominator. So it'll be minus 4 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 14 over 2. And then minus 4 divided 2 will go into that, so that's minus 2 plus or minus. Then these 2's cancel out. I'm left with root 14. And that's the same answer as I got up top there. So you can do that question in 2 ways. I don't think you can factor it. So either completing the square like you had started there, or by using the quadratic formula. And this here, right from here, that's where a lot of people struggle at trying to find a number they'll divide into 56, and a good number. And these are the numbers, like 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared, 5 squared, 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared, etc. So if I can find one of those perfect squares that'll divide into that number, like in this case it was 4, then that makes it easier to simplify. All right, hopefully that helps you with that quadratic formula.